It's with great excitement that we've moved into the new warehouse here at Eastern Creek. Prior to going operational though, we're going to need to have a conversation about, making sure that we've got our Swms and work procedures in place in order to make sure that we're safe in the workplace. If we think about the why in terms of the Swms question, it is a legal obligation obviously in terms of the fact that we have these, but let's think, I want you to go back a step at this moment, and that is I want you to think about why it's even a legal obligation, and more importantly, what are we actually trying to achieve by creating a safe work method statement within our workplace. Any thoughts? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Look, ultimately, this comes down to an injury. It comes down to people actually getting hurt in the workplace, and it comes down to us trying to control and make sure that we actually stop people from getting hurt in the workplace. It comes down to those people actually going through pain and suffering at that stage, and we need to make sure that we actually, stop those things from happening. So let's try and think about some cost of injuries at that stage. So when a person actually gets hurt in the workplace, what sort of stuff do we need to think about in terms of actual things that have cost? Yeah, hospital bills, of course. Yeah, doctor's visits. Possible loss of injury at that, loss of, earnings from the injury at that point. Yeah, agreed completely. Let's dive a little bit deeper though at that stage. Okay, I'm going to use my mate Jeff for an example. So Jeff got himself hurt severely at that stage, fell on a knee, broke it in 4 places at that stage, and has now ended up with a temporary permanent disability at that stage. So I want you to think about that actual impact to Jeff at that point. Yeah, 100%. One of those big impacts actually becomes personal. Like, this is a hidden cost. Jeff spent 3 months at home, sitting on the couch. Couldn't go out, couldn't see his friends, couldn't go to functions, couldn't go to the Christmas party, considering it's that time of year. Couldn't do any of the above. Jeff lost his part-time job at that point. Okay, so bear in mind that workers' compensation will cover you from lost earnings from your primary place of injury, but it won't actually cover you for things like lost earnings from a part-time job or that weekend job. Yeah, what about, umpiring on the weekend at kids' cricket? Yeah, potentially those types of questions we need to think about. There's a whole hidden cost of injuries that we need to think about, and more importantly, that person's going through a whole pile of pain and suffering that we need to work on. So what we're going to do is we're going to break down how to write out our Swms, and we're basically breaking it into 3 different categories at that point. The first one that we're going to think about is our risks. We're then going to consider how big is the problem, or how much is the risk, and then we're going to look at controls. So if we break those down into our risks / hazards, what's going to hurt us? That's the best way to think about these to begin with. We're then going to think about how big, how much is it actually going to hurt us? Are we talking about a scratched finger here, or are we talking about a broken leg? And then we're going to look at controls at that point. What controls do we need to put in place in order to make sure that we've got a safe system of work in place? So let's think about our forklift for a quick minute. In our warehouse, we're driving around in our forklift. What is the possible risks or hazards that come with forklift operations? Okay, we've got things like crashing the forklift. Yep, we've got things like the load over, balancing at that stage. Yep, we've got things like damage to the truck that the, forklift even came off. And what happens if the front of the forklift's too heavy compared to the back of the forklift? We could possibly have overbalancing. Absolutely. What about if we stick a load up into the high bay, up into the racking system at this stage, and that, rack happens to fall or collapse? Yeah, absolutely. We're potentially looking at that entire pallet collapsing and causing injury to person at that stage. So what we've just done is we've just identified all the risks and hazards related to people getting hurt when it comes to our forklift operation. How big? So if that load that we're carrying falls 1 metre compared to if that load that we're carrying falls 5 metres, what will be the difference? Yep, from 5 metres we've got the chance of really hurting some people. So that's then how big question. How much risk is involved in this situation is where that question comes from. And then last but not least, we need to think about things like controls at that stage. So in our controls at that stage, what are we going to do about the problem at that point? Yeah, training is definitely one of those controls to consider. What about the forklift itself in terms of is it safe to do work? Yeah, things like pre-starts and getting it serviced appropriately. Fantastic. Yeah, anything else that we can think of at that point? Safe procedures for our racking and making sure it's inspected. Absolutely, yep. So what you've just come up with is a whole pile of controls. Now when it comes to our safe work method statement or our risk assessment for this job, that's our process. What's going to hurt us? How much is it going to hurt us? And then what are those controls in place? What we're going to do right now is we're going to actually document each of those down. So in working in teams, we're going to work our way around the team at that point, and everyone's going to put forward one of those hazards that we've just discussed, how big they think it is, and then what sort of control are we going to put together at that stage. What we're going to do is we're going to build our risk assessment while it is that we're here together as a team. Okay, great work. Really happy with that. So let's take ourselves back to the beginning. We were discussing the pain question. We were discussing the why we have risk assessments and safe work methods in place. That's the most important element to consider, and that's about keeping our workmates safe at work. What happens if something changes? What happens if the load's bigger than a pallet? What happens if it's 2 pallets in width? What happens if there's a risk of overbalancing? So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work through how we deal with that next phase, the what-if type questions of how we apply this into slightly different scenarios, and more importantly, different loads that we're offloading when those 10-metre poles start turning up that are going to support the overhead wires. Awesome, let's work our way through the process.